sit back, relax, and get ready to enjoy another awesome video by Capt Frank Lanier. Please subscribe, like, and share with all your friends and all the people you hate too.
So for today's find, we're looking at the vented loop in the exhaust system of an engine aboard a mid-sized catamaran. This is the vented loop for the exhaust system. And the problem here is, of course, that they're using heater hose instead of marine grade hose for this. So this is not the proper type of hose to be used for this, and it should be replaced. So for today's find, we're looking at the vented loop in the exhaust system of an engine aboard a mid-sized catamaran. This is the vented loop for the exhaust system. And the problem here is, of course, that they're using heater hose instead of marine grade hose for this. So this is not the proper type of hose to be used for this, and it should be replaced. So for today, we're looking at a 2005 Grady 282 sailfish. These boats are cored from the top, from the chine up to the rub rail. They're cored with ingrain balsa. So what you hope you hear is something like this, nice and crisp sounding. What you don't want to hear is this right here. This indicates moisture, possible delamination in the core. And if you take a moisture meter and we're going to check it, I can guarantee you it's going to be wet. And there it is, it's pegging the meter. So this is what you have to watch out for when you have a hull that's got cored construction, particularly ingrain balsa. For today's find, we have a couple of issues with this anchor installation, anchor chain and rod and stuff. Okay, so the first up is going to be that the shackles, the screw pin shackles here are not moused. This is to prevent them from unscrewing. You got one here, at the chain where it's attached to the anchor, and also where it is attached to the rod. Both of these should be screwed or moused with stainless steel wire to prevent them from unscrewing. The second problem is that the anchor shackle is attached to the rod with just a line, and a bowline here, right? Ideally, you want a thimble spliced into this so that you can prevent chafe and stuff here where the anchor rod is attached to the shackle. And the third thing is that the bitter end of the rod is not attached to the vessel. It would be good to tie it right there
to prevent accidental loss of the anchor. So for today's find, we're looking at the rudder post packing gland on a mid-sized trawler. The find is that you can see here, let me get the light a little better, there's water around the mounting plate or the base for the packing gland. Initially, the first place you always look to see if this water is coming from is going to be the rudder post packing gland itself. And there is no water there. It's not leaking down and dripping down. So it's actually coming from beneath the mounting plate itself. So the recommendation, of course, is to inspect it, determine the cause of the leak, and correct it. To be honest, it's probably going to involve pulling the rudder post packing gland and recaulking or rebedding it. An important point to remember is when you're checking your rudder post packing gland for leaks, do it both while the boat is stationary and while it's underway making way. A lot of times these things will not leak in the stationary position, but will leak while the boat's underway. So for today's find, we have problems with the battery installation. You can see here that the battery is strapped, but the tray is too large for this battery, and it allows it to slide back and forth. Per ABYC standards and recommendation, movement for the battery can be no more than 1 inch in any direction. So the recommendation here is to either install a properly sized tray for this battery, or you also have the option of installing a battery that's properly sized for the tray. So for today's find, we're on a small center console open fisherman, and here is the emergency kill switch lanyard for the engine. However, as you can see, It's not installed, yet the engine is still running. So the problem is the defective emergency kill switch for the engine, and it should be replaced immediately. So for today's find, we have another LPG storage locker that doesn't meet standards. This one is in the console of a flying bridge helm for a mid-sized trawler. As you can see there, it vents directly onto the side deck, which it's supposed to be in a dedicated locker that vents directly overboard. Another issue is that the fuel line, which is copper, it goes right to the regulator and then right to the tank. There should be a section of flexible hose in between the regulator and the tank to prevent damage to the line due to vibration and vessel movement. So for today's find, something good. This is the discharge through hull for a holding tank on a larger French-built catamaran. So it is a gravity feed system. You don't have to worry about pumps or anything else. When you're in an area designated for overboard discharge, you just open the seacock and away it goes. So for today's find, something I know I've mentioned previously because I see it all the time. You've got, this is your typical, go bag of, type 2 PFDs. And, this is fine. You keep them stored in here, no problem. But the problem here is they're still in the shipping bags. These bags have to be removed for the Coast Guard to consider these life jackets readily accessible. So the recommendation is take off these shipping bags so that they can be readily accessible. So for today's find, we have a hatch for a foredeck anchor locker. You can see here where the coring has been damaged and replaced and repaired. They've installed new coring. And the foredeck itself, however, has some issues still. A quick tap here sounds okay, but over in this area, you have a sound that indicates possible core deterioration and delamination, meaning this area needs to be further inspected. The next step will be checking it with a moisture meter to see how that reads. So for today's find, problems that can occur during a sea trial. In this case, the raw water pump impeller has disintegrated. We noticed this when we were doing the sea trial, and the engine overheated, and the mechanic came down, pulled the impeller out of the water pump here, and that's when we found it was disintegrated. The problem is, once it disintegrates here, now you can have pieces and parts going throughout the coolant system of the engine where they can clog up, the heat exchanger and stuff or whatever. So anytime you have a failure of the impeller like this, you have to make sure that there are no pieces and parts left in the coolant system for the engine. So for today's find, we're in the aft stateroom of a mid-sized trawler. You can see here the owner has installed a new exhaust hose run from the engine. However, he has failed to adequately support it, and it's just kind of hanging and flopping around. So this exhaust system hose for the engine needs to be properly secured and mounted to prevent excessive movement. Okay, so for today's find, we're looking at an anchoring system on a larger sailboat, and we're looking at the screw pin shackles. These, of course, need to be moused or secured to prevent them from unscrewing. Now, the problem here is that they used a wire tie, which is fine. You can use a wire tie to secure this in place. However, just be aware that it will deteriorate due to UV and rot and break, just like this one has. The best way to do it is to mouse it or secure it with stainless steel wire. That way you don't have to worry about it, the UV damage and stuff, and it'll last a lot longer than a wire tie. Or a zip tie, if you want to call them a zip tie. I had a guy point that out to me as well, but I've always called them wire ties, but zip tie too, whatever you like. So when inspecting a sailboat mast and standing rigging, this is going to be the best way to do it, with the mast unstepped and laid out for full inspection. This gives you the ability to check all of the hardware, all of the standing rigging, the fittings, everything. It just makes it so much easier than climbing the mast and trying to do this while hanging from a bosun's chair and stuff. And it also lets you inspect for this case, you have a keel stepped mast. It'll let you inspect the bottom of the mast for corrosion and other issues as well. So we're looking at a mid-sized trawler here, and we see the rudder, and it's got a hole in it. What's this hole for? Well, that hole is there so that you can turn the rudder sideways and you can pull the prop, and then you can just slide the shaft right out without having to remove the rudder. Okay, so for today's find, we're in the engine room of a larger trawler, and we're looking at the exhaust systems for the engines. This is the vented loop for the exhaust system, and this is for the port engine. And if you look over at the starboard engine, it's the same way. They've just got these things hanging up with bungee cords. Of course, these vented loops need to be properly mounted and secured against movement. And why did the owner do it like this? Well, you know, it's kind of a pain. You got to put a bracket there and put a brace down to mount these things on. So instead, we just went the rednecky looking route and just, you know, tied them up there with bungee cords. Of course, again, these things need to be properly mounted and secured.
Okay, so for today's find, we have a couple of issues on the anchoring system for this mid-size powerboat. One, the chain is the rope road section of the road is attached to the chain or the anchor shackle here. It's tied directly to it, and there should be a, you know, with a knot, there should be a thimble installed here and spliced here where it attaches to the shackle so that you don't have chafe and stuff on it while it's in use. And of course, the other thing is the anchor shackle here is badly corroded and need a replacement. And finally, the shackle, the screw pin shackle, as I harp on a lot in my videos, this needs to be moused, secured with stainless steel mousing wire to prevent it from unscrewing.
So for today's find, we're looking in the bilge of a mid-size older trawler, and what you see right here is oily waste. It's called slurry or sludge, and it's hardened and dried and gooey. And actually, if you look at that, the residue here, if you look at the float switch for this bilge pump, right, that float switch is so gummed up it won't even operate. I know because I tested it right before I started videoing this. So the recommendation here is to clean the bilge of oily residue and ensure all the bilge pumps and switches are operating properly. So for today's find, we're looking at a through hull fitting below the waterline. This is actually a raw water intake for an air conditioning unit. If you look at this type of hose right here, they've got they're not using the proper type of hose or the fitting there. It's a fuel fitting or a hydraulic fitting. So of course the recommendation is to remove this, replace it with a proper marine grade hose suitable for use below the waterline, and use your hose clamps instead of this bastardized fitting here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, and you want to buy Capt Frank a cup of coffee, please click on the thanks button below this video. All tips received, not spent on coffee, will be used to improve my YouTube channel and create even more awesome videos.